Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayedhi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our subject today is prayer. In Sanskrit, it is called prārthanā. In some sense, we can say that prayer is the most simplest form of spiritual practice. It's also usually the very first way a person turns to the divine. And as we have seen on earlier occasions, it's possible to see these three practices as related: prayer, worship, and meditation. Prayer is a form of asking, and we know there are a lot of things we need in life. There is a sense of incompleteness in some form or the other that we all experience, and we turn to those who can fulfill that need, who are able to give us what we want. When we were very little, very young, the persons or people we turn to most are the elders in the family, our parents often. And then as we grow older, we learn the art of asking. And so we just use that same desire to have our needs fulfilled by turning to God. Now, of course, it's clear that we only ask for things from those who we believe can provide us those things, and those people have to be real, can't be imaginary. And so therefore, for prayer to be an effective practice, faith that God exists, God is real, is important, because we can't just be asking for something from a fictitious being. Wasn't it the prayer of an agnostic to say, "Oh God, if there is God, save my soul, if there is a soul"? However, kind of a, whatever you call that prayer, but that prayer will lack that force, that intensity, that depth, unless I know that God exists. Then that prayer becomes more real. And oftentimes we find that when we ask, the prayers can get answered. And sometimes, usually when we say when prayers are answered, we usually mean by that I asked for something and I got it. And if I ask for something and I don't get it, then I say, well, prayer is not answered, which is not the right way to think. If I don't get what I want, the prayer has been answered with a no. But no is an answer. And so I do believe that every prayer is answered. And in some ways, simply answering with a yes itself need not mean that it's a sign of love. A no answer can also be a sign of love. As parents, as grandparents, we know that when little children ask for things from parents, generally the parents don't say yes to everything. The parents just make a quiet determination whether this is good for my child or not. And if they feel this is something good for them, they'll say yes. If they feel it's something not particularly helpful to them, they will say no. But when parents say no, that's done with love. That's done because they love the child, they care for the child. And therefore, it's possible to see that prayer as a discipline always receives God's answer. And clearly though, what many of us want is a yes answer. And whenever we do get a yes answer, we feel grateful. that this is something it also strengthens our faith. It's something I wanted, and through God's grace, I got it. And oftentimes, when the heart is filled with gratitude, Thanksgiving will be soon upon us. The gratitude shows itself in giving, thanksgiving, and so worship can be seen as an act of giving. That we receive grace from the divine, and then in return we just feel grateful, and then with the fullness of our heart, then we offer things to the divine. In a ritual worship, clearly there is the things, as many of you have seen, the pujas that we have at the Vedanta Center. We offer flowers, fruits, incense, sandal paste, lots of things. And these are, of course, clear things that are visible and tangible. But giving is at even higher levels. So worship, yes, there is a ritualistic worship in you give fruits and flowers and food. But the inner worship is when one offers oneself to the divine. Then we ourselves become a flower. The offering of us as a flower at the feet of the divine is also an act of worship. And therefore, worship has both these components. There is this external worship, and there is the internal worship. And merely an external worship without a complementary internal worship wouldn't be complete. And therefore, even when we attend any puja, it's good to be aware of that fact, that in addition to what we are seeing externally with these eyes, there is a lot going on internally, not only in the one who is doing the puja, but also those who are sitting and participating in the puja. There has to be this internal thing going on. So I think that it will be helpful to always remind ourselves of the fact that although when you come for the pujas here, there is this one person, usually me, who will be doing the puja, but do not think that all of you are just sitting and watching. No, it's the puja at the Vedanta Center, all of us are doing the puja. There is just one, it's not enough place for all of us to sit and do it here. So there is only one person sitting here. But this is only a representative. That the puja, everyone is directly involved in the puja. And one way we all can participate in the puja is through internally. That when you see a flower being offered, fruit being offered, internally I can say, I'm offering all of these things mentally to the divine sitting in my heart. And as I said, the best offering, the highest offering would be offering of oneself at the feet of the divine. So prayer is a movement from God towards us when we receive things from the divine. Worship is a movement from us towards the divine when we make offerings. Now both of these movements, from God towards us and from us towards the divine, bring the two closer together. And the more and more close the creator and the creature, God and us, come, then meditation becomes a fruitful exercise. Although meditation is more of a buzzword, everyone wants to meditate, what is often not kept in mind is that for meditation to be successful, enough preparation needs to be done. Meditation in itself is a fairly advanced practice. It's more than simply just sitting quietly and watching one's breath. That's a good beginning. But simply being mindful of one's breathing itself is not a complete meditation practice. It's helpful. It can quieten the mind, but that's not meditation in itself. The best way to prepare ourselves for a good and deep and successful practice of meditation, we need to have some place in our lives for both prayer as well as worship. So these three things, prayer, worship, meditation, the Vedas the way the Vedas are divided, the different sections in Vedas, show more or less this way of progression towards the divine. So the first section of the Vedas was called the Samhitas. And primarily, this section contains prayers, hymns, prayers to all these divine forces of nature. And the second section of Vedas, called the Brahmanas, contain all this ritualistic worship, all the details about how the different sacrifices, pujas are done, etc. The third section of the Vedas, called the Aranyakas, they contain all these meditations. During Vedic period, they were called the different Vidyas. So you see the prayer, worship, meditation through these first three sections. And the last section, called the Upanishads, is essentially these highest experiences that these enlightened ones had. So prayer, worship, meditation, and then comes this realization. And that's why in Vedic times, when the student first went to the teacher's place to study, the very first lesson the teacher gave, before starting with any text, the first lesson was the teaching of this prayer, considered by many the most sacred prayer in the tradition. It's called the Gayatri prayer. Many of you are maybe familiar with it. It's called Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yonaf Prachodayat. This prayer is done looking upon the sun, at the sun. Sun is the brightest object known to us, although in a larger scheme of things we know that the sun is a pretty minor star in this galactic universe. But to us, that's still the brightest object that we have here. And so the sun is often looked upon in these ancient texts as the symbol, that effulgence of the sun reminding us of that source of all knowledge and wisdom. So this prayer, which means we meditate upon the worshipful effulgence of the divine sun, that the supreme reality, who pervades the earth, sky, and heavens, may that reality guide our understanding. Dhiyo Yona, that Dhi is, is a higher dimension of Buddhi. Buddhi is, of course, the part of the intellect. Now, intellect is something that we all have, but it's not necessarily opened up fully in all of us. So a little bit of it is open, and that's usually enough for us to get through this life in a fairly good way. Someone once mentioned to me, one of the very elderly monks of our order, he said, if someone's dhi, someone's intellect, if it were to be opened up even 5 to 10%, that person would be considered a genius. You'll get a Nobel Prize maybe. So for most of us, it's opened up just 1 or 2%. So we can imagine the enormous potential that's there in this buddhi that we have. Now, in order for us to realize God, to become enlightened, merely 5 or 10% of buddhi is not enough. To understand the subtleness of these highest teachings, we need to open up a lot more of the buddhi. And that's why the very first lesson that the teachers gave in ancient times was this prayer. Prayer for opening up of this power of spiritual intuition in our heart. And once that opens up, then when we study any text, study the Gita, the Upanishads, any holy text of any tradition, not only will we understand the literal meaning of the words, but we can see the subtler layers, the nuances involved in that. All of these ancient texts, studying them and looking at a newspaper is very different, obviously. We know that very few people read newspapers these days, everything being online. But we know the news of the day becomes outdated just a day later. But these ancient texts, which have been with us for centuries, people are still reading them over and over and over again. The need for repeated study is that all of these texts have layers of meaning. And the more awakened our intellect is, we have access then to these subtler layers which are below. Otherwise, we might just read something and say, okay, I get it, I understood what it means. But then, when we read it again and over and reflect over it, we begin to see the meaning in it which we may not have noticed in our first reading. And that's why repeated study can be very helpful. Prayer, although I began by saying it's a form of asking, it's really more than asking. As we continue with the practice of prayer, it doesn't remain limited to asking. One little boy was once asked, "Do you pray every day?" And the boy said, "Most days, not every day." "Why not?" And the little boy said, "Some days I just don't want anything." So prayer can be, prayer is a form of asking, is just the beginning. But as we advance in this practice of prayer, it doesn't remain limited to asking. It becomes to experiencing the presence of the divine. And that's very important. Something that we need to practice. By practice, I mean something we need to be aware of. Every time we go to a place of worship, when we enter, when we stand before the altar, what do we see? How do we see? Do we remind ourselves that what we see on the altar is not just some image or a symbol or a photograph, that there is that actual presence of the divine there? And if whatever we pray, whatever we do, when we meditate with that awareness that we are in the presence, we see that the quality of our prayer, the quality of our meditation improves considerably. And so, feeling the presence of the divine is what prayer can do in our advanced practice. At some point, we will see that in the beginning, prayer, worship, and meditation might feel as if there are three different practices. But over time, as we continue doing them, we'll see that they all merge into one. That it just becomes a different way of being in the presence of God. Whether I'm praying, whether I'm worshiping, whether I'm meditating, but always be aware that God is present. In the beginning, if you're sitting and doing your practice before an altar, it might seem as if God is there right in front of me. But the more we begin to feel the presence of the divine, we'll see God is not just in front of me. God is behind me. God is to the left, right, everywhere, above, below. We are just kind of surrounded by the divine in every direction. If we can go through life not forgetting this, we won't be afraid of anything. There is no place for anxiety, worry of any kind if we just know, just like a little baby in the embrace of her mother or in the arms of her mother, not afraid of anything. My mother is here to protect me. And that's exactly how every one of us is being carried all through our life, from the moment we are born till the end. And the presence of anxiety and worry is an indication that I have forgotten the fact that I'm already in the arms of the Divine Mother. That would be one way a bhakta, a devotee, would keep that awareness. The main purpose of prayer, clearly, is to seek divine help in attaining moral purity and spiritual progress. Even though prayer is a kind of asking, it's not a form of begging. Although sometimes people think, I don't like to ask anything, I don't like to beg. But prayer is not begging, because we know that, yes, if I see a beggar, we help someone in need. There is really no relationship between the beggar and the giver. Yes, you feel a little compassion and you give, and there it ends. But when we ask something from God, it's only our ego and our ignorance that makes us feel, I'm begging. It's just like as little babies, when little children, we go and ask something from our parents. We don't think, I'm a beggar And then what a child does from the parents is something you feel that closeness, you feel that connection, you feel that you are entitled to it. Swami Vivekananda once said, no begging, demanding the highest. God is our very own. That would be the spirit with which a bhakta might approach the divine. The prayers are clearly, obviously, of at least two different kinds. There is what we might call a secular prayer, and then there is the spiritual prayer. And the distinction is made simply by depending on what we are asking for. If I ask for things of this part of this world in which we are, then that would be considered a secular prayer, or even a worldly prayer, because it's something I'm seeking help for some worldly desire that I have, or desire in order helpful for me in this world. And a spiritual prayer would be if I ask for something that would be directly connected with my spiritual progress. So one might say, give me the strength to be truthful, to be honest, to be unselfish, to be kind, all the essential qualities we need to practice spiritual life. One of our Swamis used to narrate one story about so this Swami was a head of our center in Seattle for many years. His name was Swami Vividishananda. He was a disciple of Brahmananji, I think. And so years later, when he was very old, and so I heard this from Swami Swahananda, who was himself head of Hollywood for many years. He passed away about 10 or 12 years ago. So he narrated. So he visited this older Swami in Seattle, and this happened way back in the 60s. So Swami Swahananda was very young then, and he found Swami Vividishananda was a little bit looking a little worried. And so this young Swami asked him, Maharaj, why are you, what's worrying? And he said, oh, this building of the center has become quite old and dilapidated, and we need to renovate this place. And so I just prayed to Thakur, I prayed to Ramakrishna that if we get some funds, we'll renovate the building. And so the young Swami was just said, Maharaj, you're asking Ramakrishna for funds, for money to renovate this building? Is that what we should be praying for? And then he said, this old Swami, he just with tears in his eyes, he says, who else will I ask to? Who else will I go to? And then he said, I just felt bad for even just kind of raising that question. So there is this thing that, yes, we might think something is secular as asking money to renovate a building, but if a bhakta approaches saying, I don't have any other place to go to, just as a child would go to the mother or the father, I go, this Ramakrishna is my only support. And so he was able to appreciate that way of thinking. We also recognize, this is another story that many of you would have read already. I think, I won't give you an exact detail as it is in the books. In Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda's teaching, we find that they say that asking God for the little things like, oh, just I'm having severe headache, please make sure my headache goes away. Nothing wrong in itself to do that, but asking God to take care of these little niggling things of our life is like going to an emperor. An emperor says, ask for whatever you want. And then you say, oh, could I have a little 1 bag of 1 pound of eggplants or something? And yes, the emperor can give it to us. But if the emperor is capable of giving so much more than asking for these kind of very silly things, we ourselves might feel embarrassed. That if the divine can give us the highest thing, why should we be just asking for these little things? So it's possible that we are beginning our prayers might be very secular, but the more we keep on doing it with faith, eventually these secular prayers can mature into deeper and more spiritual prayers. And at some point we do realize in the beginning a prayer might be a kind of a monologue. We know that if you call up someone over the phone, and nowadays you no longer hold it this way, you kind of hold it this speak someone over the phone, and you keep on speaking, we keep on speaking with the hope that the other person is still holding it. And so for a long time, if we don't hear any sound, we say, are you there? Are you there? We keep on asking. And you have to have an audible response from the other side. Of course, if you're doing a video chat, then it's very clear whether the other person is listening or not. So in the beginning, when we pray, we may not hear anything back. And so what is it that will help me continue in my prayer? The only thing is that the strong faith that even though I'm not able to hear God's voice right now, God is hearing my voice. It is that faith that will help in me continuing to pray. Otherwise, I'm speaking, but God knows whether anyone is there on the other side, other end of the line at all. And so in the beginning, a prayer might feel like a monologue, but the more our faith deepens, gradually we discover that it's actually a dialogue. Sometimes people say things like, a prayer is when I speak with God, and meditation is when God speaks to me. To think about it any which way you like, but it's good to recognize that eventually what prayer, worship, and meditation do is bring the two together. And then there is that communication that's possible. There are clearly two ways of praying again, at least. One is the external form of praying, in which we use books and we pray. We can recite ancient prayers or we can have modern prayers, but we often do it usually in groups or audibly. And then there is a silent prayer, when no words may be used, but one might pray silently. And sometimes the japa, the repetition of the mantra that people do, it's usually not done loudly. It's done silently. To someone else, someone might just see someone is sitting just quietly. But in the mind, that repetition of the mantra is going on. And a mantra is nothing but a short prayer. So if you repeat the mantra 108 times, you have actually repeated the prayer 108 times. So doing japa itself can be seen as a form, as a practice of the prayer. So one other point to be kept in mind is prayer is something and worship is something that we can do. If we want to be accurate in the way we say these things, then in that sense, meditation cannot really be done. Meditation is something that happens. We can do prayer. We can do worship. And although we normally say, okay, now I'm going to do meditation, what do I really mean when I say I'm going to do or I am going to meditate? Essentially, it means I'm going to now sit quietly and do something. And sometimes you say, oh, the mind is wandering or I'm feeling drowsy. All of that things happen. When does meditation become a meditation? Not simply through just sitting quietly. Not simply through doing any number of things people do. Think about sleeping. Although we say, now I'm going to sleep, sleep is something that cannot be done. Sleep is something that happens. What we can do is something different. What we can do is we can create an environment which makes sleep possible. You can find a nice, comfortable bed, switch off the light, and then lie down comfortably and just wait. Beyond that, there's nothing you can do. So oftentimes we just keep turning and twisting until at some point sleep happens. So I am going to sleep is not a very accurate statement. I can say I am now going to lie in my bed and then just wait. Meditation is a little bit like that. That what we are trying to do is like sit quietly, calm the mind, and just wait for meditation to happen. Not to go too deep into this, I have spoken on this on earlier occasions, but just to keep this at the back of the mind, that it's helpful to make a distinction between thinking and meditation. Thinking is a mental activity. So when we are doing japa, there is a thinking involved. The mind is active. The mind is trying to visualize the chosen deity, the Ishta. The mind also is focusing on the sound of the mantra. So that's a very active process. But meditation, there is no conscious activity. It's just a state. Meditation is more a state of being than of any activity. And therefore, in Sanskrit, the word that often gets used is darshan, seeing. Meditation is actually seeing God. And if God is in my heart, if I just shut out the world, I focus in the heart, and if God is in the heart, I should be able to see God. But obviously, for most of us in the beginning, we just try to be in a quiet spot, keep all the distractions out, and look in the heart. In the beginning, it's usually darkness. That's how it just begins. Now, then the question is, well, if meditation is seeing God, I'm not seeing God right now, then what shall I do now? And the next best thing I can do is think about God. But thinking about God itself is not meditation. But thinking upon God is a good step towards taking me to the state of meditation. So if I keep on thinking about God to the exclusion of any other thought, at some point, when my thinking becomes intense, it becomes with one focus, then the thinking itself stops at some point, and then seeing begins. And when that seeing begins, that is when meditation occurs. It's a little bit like we are just turning and twisting in the bed, trying to get sleep. We are aware that we are in the bed, and at some point, suddenly, everything shuts out. We no longer remember we are in the bed. And then the next moment, you might be in Hawaii or Bermuda or somewhere in your dream, but you're not in the bed anymore. So that's exactly how meditation is. So what are the benefits of prayer? Now, the first benefit of prayer is it reduces the inner resistance of the ego. Ego plays a major part in our lives. And ego is actually essential. Now, it's good to make a distinction between ego and egoism. Ego is simply the sense of I. In itself, pretty neutral, just I. Egoism would be then this I attaching itself to different things, to qualities, people, places, and so on, and appropriating them. That would be egoism. Now, egoism is terrible. It's not helpful in spiritual life. But just the ego, at the sense of I, itself is fine. It's not harmful. In fact, it's necessary. For any activity to occur, a sense of I is important. I as an agent of action. I as the one who is experiencing things. But this I, when it attaches itself to all kinds of things, it develops the power to resist things that seem to weaken the ego, I. And so prayer is one way that the resistance of the ego can be removed. The next thing prayer does, it helps to remove our fear and insecurity. Because as I said, if prayer can help me experience the presence of the divine, and if the divine is around me, then I won't feel afraid of anything. The third thing prayer does, it withdraws the mind from distractions. In yoga, they sometimes speak about pratyahara. And in a few weeks earlier, we saw among the basic practices in Vedanta, one is called uparati, of the mind that is getting distracted and the ability to withdraw the mind. It may be difficult to straight away enter into the state of meditation, but it's relatively easy that if my mind is getting distracted, if I consciously bring it to the thought of the divine, and if a certain symbol or a picture or an image can help me do that, it becomes easier then to withdraw the mind from other things. And finally, it stimulates the heart center. The heart is a word that occurs often in religious literature across different traditions. And as, again, something we have seen before, when it is said that God dwells in our heart, it's not the biological heart really. There isn't much place for God to be there, just filled with blood and all kinds of things. No, but then which heart are we thinking about? We also know that besides the physiological heart, there is heart at the seat of emotions. So there is an emotional heart. We know that when we feel strongly about something, when we are overwhelmed with feelings and emotions, we are able to feel something here. People say with a heavy heart, or we feel emotional, where automatically the hand kind of goes here. So the heart here is also a seat of emotions. So there is the physical heart, there is the emotional heart. But when we say meditate on the divine in the heart, it's actually neither the physical heart nor the emotional heart. There is a third, a spiritual heart. Now, we don't know the exact location. We all know that all these three hearts, don't go on telling your friend we have three hearts. They might be alarmed. But you understand the sense in which I'm saying it. So all of these three things are here. Sometimes when they pray or worship or meditate, they might feel very emotional. Sometimes that emotion could show up in form of tears, or an upsurge of feeling in the heart. What it really means is that at some point, it's the emotional heart that has gotten stimulated or activated. And when we actually have the direct perception of the divine in the heart is only when that spiritual heart becomes awakened. So the Gayatri prayer I mentioned in the beginning, one of the functions of that prayer is to activate the spiritual heart. And that's one of the reasons that when we try to meditate and try to visualize the divine, it becomes difficult because we haven't located the spiritual heart yet. So one of the first genuine spiritual experiences that can come to people is first just feeling, not just feeling. Feeling, again, it's a kind of an emotional state. Actually experiencing the spiritual heart here. And when that is done, then somehow being able to see the divine in whichever form or way we think of the divine becomes so much more easier. Then the image, the way we think of the divine, that form of the divine gets more stabilized. And so that is a great benefit of the practice of prayer. It awakens that spiritual heart. And that's why I said, for a good meditation, a sustained practice of prayer is very, very helpful. In fact, very essential. And finally, prayer also helps us to keep the mind alert. Sometimes people try to meditate and just fall asleep because it's just a good rest, and then they wake up and they find, oh, I had such great meditation. Well, probably I had just good relaxation, good sleep. But prayer, because the mind is involved, we are trying to, it's an activity. It's not something that, prayer is not something that happens. Prayer is something that needs to be done. And so prayer also helps to keep the mind alert. And ultimately, of course, it's prayer that can help us transcend our limitations and become spiritually illumined. So prayer is the first practice that most of us start with, but the practice itself, as it deepens and as we mature into that practice, it can take us to that highest thing. And so it will be helpful for every one of us to look in our heart and say, does prayer have any role in my life? How am I doing it? How I can make the practice stronger so that I go closer to the spiritual goal I have before me. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu.